Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We'll start our work, our round table devoted to the topic land relations in United Communities. We have invited experts in decentralization and local self-government development in land relations, heads of the consolidated communities and members of consolidated communities. This round table is organized by the UCMC Civic Association. Our round table is available on stream and with simultaneous translation into English. Today we have 7 participants, and later via telephone connection we will have Member of Parliament, Mr. Natalia. So, Mr. Shaw, could you explain whether it is possible to transfer the land to local communities and whether this is needed? Good afternoon. As of today, in our legislation, as of today, there is a situation when local self-governments have only have at their disposal only the land which is within the boundaries of the settlement or the town, while and taxes from this land go to their budgets, but the land around the settlement or the small town is at disposal of the other authorities, and this issue has to be resolved somehow. This problem issue is to be resolved, and the concept for local self-government reform provides for some solutions, and there were some legislative initiatives submitted to the Parliament. Actually, all of them are about transfer of the right to allocate or dispose this land to local self-government, but for consolidated communities, this had become more strong problem issues because they unite usually they unite and consolidate several settlements, villages, small towns, and this enlarges the territory which is which should be put under control of these consolidated communities. So the Prime Minister has authorized the drafters to develop some law which is less disputable law, so to say, which would allow the local governments of consolidated communities to be full masters of their land, and and it will subordinate state lands to the local self-governments, and thus the local self-governments will become true owners of that lands. They will be able to sell, to buy them, to lease, etc. But the state preserves ownership over that land on which state property facilities are built, where the state agricultural lands are located, and the territories where strategic facilities, military facilities are constructed. The passage of this law will allow to to implement fully the right of local self-governments, fully use the land around their settlements, and this will empower further local communities. Thank you. Mr. Oleksandr, Mr. Serhii had called this new draft law the least disputable and the one having biggest chances for passage in the parliament. As the head of the cities association or local communities association, how do you think whether it is possible that it will be passed by the parliament, and how this process could be accelerated? Thank you. I agree with Mr. Serhii. Our association unites more than 100 consolidated communities. Those consolidated communities, which had been created within last 3 years, from the very beginning started to define their strategy and development strategies, and had started planning of their territories. Unfortunately, as of today, only cemeteries and waste dumps remain in the property of local self-governments beyond the territory of a small town or village. And unfortunately, this is a very grave situation. We need to decrease corruption in the land area. The possibility to dispose and to use the lands around villages and towns will become a clear signal that we are ready to develop our territory. This will be a good signal to investors to come to us. So we have drafted letters and sent them to the Verkhovna Rada speaker, to the Prime Minister, and to the members of parliament, some members of parliament who represent our territories from the majority constituencies. And thus we hope that this law will be passed soon. Dear heads of consolidated communities, you might remember that example from Khmelnytsk Oblast, when investor who planned to build up a plant were creating more than 5,000 jobs in the local community, but the local council failed to approve the land price. So the question to you, in Poltava region, what are the conditions for investors? I will describe first my consolidated community. This is 200 square 200 square kilometers, and we have forests, we have woods, we have villages and towns, and all these resources could be potentially used for attraction of investors, for development of agriculture and forestry. When you mentioned that grave case from Khmelnytsk region, I immediately understood that this is typical for Ukraine. In local council, we are responsible to our voters, and in order to bear this responsibility, we should be able to ensure development of the territory. But without resources, you cannot develop, and you should get these resources into your ownership. Actually, this is as necessary as air for breathing. Now my question to the head of consolidated community from Zaporizhia Oblast. As far as I understand, in your community, the land tax is the second in amounts in terms of revenues after personal income tax. So, what are your losses or underpaid revenues related to the problem of not possessing the land around your territorial community? Actually, the draft law which you mentioned, 71/18, is very important because I believe that the entire Ukraine has been waiting for this law. The disposal and ownership of land around villages and towns is extremely important for local communities. There are three important laws: the law about municipal guard, the law about about waste treatment and disposal, and the third important law is about ownership of surrounding land. We could increase the revenues of our local budget by 50% in case of ownership of that over that land, and thus we'll be able to collect taxes. But in order to be able to do this, we need to get this land to our ownership on the one hand and to attract investors on the others. The people in our communities, they have been changing gradually when they see that local councils, very active people around local council, civic society, they try to do something, but our efforts are all wasted in vain unless we have this law. And we have a lot to do, but we drastically need this law. Mr. Yurii, you had a comment. When you asked about the additional revenues to the budget, I immediately understood that it is very difficult to calculate, but the right the right of ownership on land is very important. Of course, the local authorities will not be eager to sell this land. They will be eager to use it actively. By the way, there will be a separate problem
на початку літа, коли ми підводили певні підсумки і будували плани про те, як почнеться наш наступний опалювальний сезон. Нашими пунктами обговорення
міністерства, зважаючи на останні новини про монетизацію субсидій, на наступний опалювальний
пунктами обговорення
the head of the association was correct when he said that local councils can impose any fines or charges on perpetrators only in terms of cemeteries and official waste dumps, while when there are unsanctioned dump wastes, they can do nothing. They can only observe that what's happening, what's going on, and they can do nothing. They cannot keep their territory tidy. So this, the passage of the law will set the clear rules of the game, and they will authorize local council to plan the local community territory and to comply with some conditions and provisions set by legislation. It won't make the life of local communities easier. It won't introduce a lot of discrepancy for them. It won't create any chaos. Unlike it is suggested by the alternative optional draft law, which contains, for example, such a provision that the commissioning of the master plan for the community territory is compulsory. This would require a lot of money. While in our draft law, we had formulated only the obligatory description of the territories which is transferred to the local communities. By the way, the State Committee on Land and some other state bodies have to control the boundaries of different land territories owned by different owners. That's why I believe that the law number 7118 should be taken as the base draft, and some maybe provisions from draft 7118 one should be added to this to this basic law. And we should set some conditions maybe that this and put some transition period allowing the state to formalize the land plots which belong to it, especially those land plots which are registered in the state cadastre. While the alternative draft law sets it everything bottom down, so to say. So these are radically opposite approaches which are reflected in both laws. And we believe that 7118 is the draft law which is better, unlike 4355.
І друга позиція, тут дається.
And the second position is that the right is given only to the one who is capable, to the United Territorial Community. That is why I believe that after this draft law is passed, the process of reform of territorial system will continue and will be developing very quickly. We'll try to make contact with Anatoly Matviyenko, the MP. Good afternoon, Anatoly. Do you hear us? Could you tell us, Anatoly, do you support as the MP the idea of transfer of land? Do you support the idea of transfer of land, of the state-owned land, from Geocadastre to communities? Will you be supporting in the Parliament the draft law 7118? And please comment this draft law 7118.1. It's not about transfer, but about management. So I support this draft law, even though we are moving not according to the Constitution, because everything should start from the Constitution. Unfortunately, can you hear me? Yes. There was a norm inserted into the law, so-called Minsk problems, and that destroyed the law on local self-governance. And we are going not along the way of Constitution, but we are going along some underground ways. But it's better than doing nothing. But this passing this draft law will mean either the success of Ukraine or failure of Ukraine. That is why this draft law, this law has to be passed. It addresses very important problem, addresses the problem of development, because now it also addresses the problem of tax base and effective control, what we don't have now. The alternative draft law does not correspond to the problem that the government set. It talks about changes of governance, but it talks about possible settling of other issues. If this law is only about code and to other laws, the alternative draft is about 3 codes and 12 laws. Now, to pass this law when we have not regulated the basic level is not feasible, because we are not writing correct norms. This law shouldn't be considered now. When we regulate it all, when the United Territorial Communities will cover the whole territory, then we can talk about regulating other issues. But now we need to open the door to the reform of local self-governance. So I believe the basic or the governmental draft law will be passed as the very important first step. Thank you. Your position is you support this draft law 7118. And again, what are your forecasts as to the passing the law by the parliament? Our faction will be voting, I believe, but the election process has started, and you know that all the opposition factions are crying, let's give the right of governance, of governing land resources to all the communities, united and non-united. I believe that's a big mistake, because the law on the changes stimulates the communities to get united, and the future local self-governance. Its success depends on whether there are capable communities. If we provide the land resource and the revenues from the tax to non-united communities, they will be opposing unification of communities, and it will be much more difficult to unite communities, because district administrations are against that, because they are corruptionists, and there will be some small village communities which will be getting additional resources. This is to the worst. That is why we have non-pro-Ukrainian position, but the position when it is the worst, it is better. I believe that we shouldn't allow this situation to happen. We need to talk only about united territorial communities, but not about all of them. I have the discussion with the people who are present there, and I believe that today there should be 10, 12,000 the population of united territorial community. But because of the geography, we cannot create such the communities. We need to look at this aspect, and I believe that is the issue for the second reading, and we need to discuss it as well.
Дуже дякуємо вам.
Thank you. Greetings to all of you. Thank you, Anatoly. Thank you for finding time to participate in the round table. Dear colleagues, we understand that we have this expert discussion, but I would like us to say to the public, which lands are we talking about? What's the price of these lands? What's the price of this issue? Could you explain it, Serhii? That's understandable that the development of territorial communities only within the settlements is impossible. United territorial communities are more interested in rational use of the land than anyone else, and united territorial communities have incentives for effective management of land resources on their territory. But there are several issues which restrict such governance. First of all, territorial communities don't have enough authority outside settlements. This is the issue which is to be addressed by the legislation, but I believe that, well, the other draft law is larger, but any solution is better than no solution at all. It would be worse. It would be very bad if the decision is not made, and addressing and passing at least one of the draft laws is the best option. And I would like you to draw attention to some other issues which we are not considering. First of all, that's for effective governance or management of land resources. The territorial communities don't have enough information. Very often the information is contradictory, and the communities do not have enough money to ensure the protection of land. There are some forests which are to be maintained, and there are plenty of degraded lands. Also, the communities do not have the experience of technical support, personnel support to ensure effective management of land resources. And I believe that without addressing all these issues, the full-fledged local reform and reform of self-governance is impossible. I believe that these are the issues which are to be the main ones, and they are to be addressed. All others, there are many of them, and they will be all the time within our scope of attention, and they are to be the priority ones. The situation is that the draft law is passed, and united communities have the possibility to govern the lands. What could be the corruption risks? In fact, we can expect that the level of corruption in land relations will go down. That is related to the fact that there will be not the situation when only one bureaucrat passes the decision, makes the decision, and he feels himself to be the God, and here the discretion is the highest. The local community is the collegial body. When we say that we give powers to the bodies which are closer to people, then, you know, they're trying to do something in the shadow. They're trying to convince the community to vote for some certain things which do not correspond to the interests of local community. This will be difficult to do. So we'll
rent this land from each other. Now about draft laws. 7118, this is the governmental draft law. It is of narrow nature, and it resolves the issue of land resource management for consolidated local communities. There are minimal opposition to this draft law. While alternative draft law number 7118.1, which is registered by the coalition of MPs, it comprises a much broader set of issues able to resolve many important problems of local communities. But there are some corruption risks in this law, especially in terms of state geocadastre. For example, it retains the right to manage the lands, and it preserves the right to veto some decisions of the local communities. And thus it will have the oversight function. But at the same time, this law says nothing about the oversight over state geocadastre. So I believe that we should pass the draft law number 7118 and then come back to the 7118.1 and to discuss further issues around these problems. We invited participants from the state geocadastre, and but the person whom they delegated to this session, this lady, Miss Natalia, is not authorized to discuss the issue. I would like to add about control and oversight. The oversight system should be structured as follows. The controlling body or oversight body, local body, should take control over private people who use the land, while the state body, state administration, in line with Constitution, has to supervise how the local community, how the local government is using its land. I think it would be logic that state geocadastre should become this controlling body, but in this case we should deprive it from the function to manage public lands, because otherwise we will have the conflict of interest situation. So we either have to create a supervisory body for land resources, like part of the state property fund, dealing with land issues. And in this case, the Cadastre state Geocadastre will be responsible for all the lands. Of course, this is a bottleneck in the draft law number 71/18, and we expect to have problems with the abuse of the current proposed functions. While today we observe abusers on behalf of the state Geocadastre in land use area, similarly, we expect to have this with state Geocadastre again. I do not think the state oblast administrations will be able to carry out this function. So in the future, thinking about the proper legislative initiative for approval, we should take number 71/18.1, but there should be an amendment in this draft law in terms of Article 116. In general, all these precautions mentioned by Mr. Andrii Martyn, I agree with them. There is a problem for us because we are balancing with the vague pieces of law. We were thinking about transfer to municipal property, which is a lengthy and cumbersome process. That's why we decided to omit this stage and to transfer these lands without land structuring. But the first step should be done by the state. The state should decide what lands are the public lands and all the rest or state lands. About Matviyenko, I agree with him that big communities would be mighty enough to deal with all the land issues. But we have small communities that control huge territories, and of course, they will lack professionalism in managing that huge territories of land. And in this case, they will be able to cooperate with their neighbors in terms of land management. The legislation will allow us to resolve these problems in the future. And if we manage to launch this process today, the next year, we will have first positive outcomes. I agree with my colleagues that that it is very important to stop unlawful appropriation of lands, and which is very corrupt, which abuses a lot of laws. Local self-governments are more responsible, and because the municipal authorities want to be re-elected. Oleksandr, I would like to determine the position of our association once again, that we support draft law number 7118, this governmental draft law, because it says that the consolidated local communities will manage the lands and dispose the lands. When the local, when consolidated communities were created, one of the carrots imposed by the government, promised by the government, was this management and possession of land. When today in the territory of some consolidated community, there is some land, and moreover 2 or 3 petrol stations who pay excise fuel payments to this local community, then you will be unable to consolidate this community further. Dear colleagues, who would like to speak? I will add very briefly about revenues of the communities. The draft law number 7118 deprives local communities from revenues coming as tax after land sales. Well, so the local community will manage the land, but it will not get money from the sales of that land. I will comment on some problem issues. I fully agree with Andrii that boundaries of the community and boundaries of the municipal property land, there's a different things. We cannot do this automatically today and believe that the boundaries will fully coincide. The municipal land is very important. The majority of settlements having their boundaries were produced in late 1970s, 1980s. As of today, these boundaries are changed. On the other hand, there are inconsistencies in the boundaries, in factual boundaries, and the boundaries registered in the state Geocadastre. When we decide about the municipal property land, we should keep in mind the collective property lands, which today remain beyond any legal status, and thus we have to put into Cadastre collective lands first, then to register municipal property land, and only after to these processes the local community will fully master its lands. We should distinguish between the oversight and supervision, and I think carefully what should be attained to whom, to what body. So this is my remark, and once again, any solution would be better than no solution at all. Now let us shift to the questions and answers.
Please introduce yourself. I am from the portal Decentralization of Authorities. Once we're talking about expanding the powers and we're talking about governance, why don't we talk today about the possibility to provide to communities to exercise comprehensive spatial planning? who could answer?
The sense
is that 7118 is the one. They introduced the notion of the scheme of planning of the territory of communities. The architects are arguing about what is better, how it is better to tell it, the scheme or the plan. Why do we insist that the territorial community should be set up in accordance, the community set up according to the prospective plan? Is because this plan should cover perspective. It should
не зробиться повністю
till they do it, we will have problems in that planning. That is why the plan should cover the whole territory, the territory which is in the perspective plan. And then there will be the subject for control, the subject for supervision. The subject for control is by one authority, and they will control that it is constructed where it is allowed to construct it, but the state supervisory board will supervise whether the document has been drafted in accordance with the construction norms, taking into account all the limitations. I will clarify my question. Today, the current legislation doesn't have such type of a document as comprehensive perspective planning of the territory of community. That is why we're introducing amendments to the law. And this will have this notion, scheme of the territory of community. And this way, this issue will be addressed. Now we have the scheme of planning the district, and the community is part of the district. And the district council is in conflict with the community, and they have to give, to issue the document which is called the scheme of planning part of the district, but they do not issue it.
Цим законопроектом. До речі, в альтернативному я не бачу.
And I don't see it in alternative version. Allow me. You are right. This could become the instrument of governing the land resources and the territory. That would become the anti-corruption instrument. But today, the legislation, which is about developing different types of documents, and the legislation which regulates the planning, and so feasibility studies, they compete. If territorial community is offered to execute all the requirements of the legislation, they will not do it because there are so many documents which contradict each other. We work on that to create one universal document which would define clear prospective decisions on this territory. And there, citizen investors, anyone could come and see and decide where and how they can use land, what would be the duties and what will be the limits, the boundaries, different types of boundaries. If there's support, then help us. First electronic newspaper. I have the question to the representatives of United Territorial Communities. Were there any cases when the lack of legislation that we are talking about wouldn't allow you to attract investments to the community? Maybe I will start. Yes, we have local investors, and they're very powerful, and they today have the possibility to build some cattle breeding complexes. And now the question is on expansion of their production, because the lands which could be used, they are not allocated to them. So I believe that when we are able to break this chain, we will be able to develop our territories. We also had a problem, but that was related to the fact that we were finishing the master plan of our settlement, and the investor who wanted to build the brick plant left us because the situation was not resolved. We also had two projects which were on the territory of non-defined lands because no one knew where's the boundary of the settlement. In one situation, we resolved it positively. That was the agricultural land. It was put for auction. And we came to agreement with the administration that they will not appeal against this decision, and these are 22
Іншому об'єкту це сонячні
with another project, solar plant, and the people wanted to construct because our local investors could not find the territory. They took part of the non-sanctioned waste storage territory. But there are many cases when not local investor comes. There were cases when people came wanting to build some processing plants. They would come to us and we say that the location that they wanted is outside the settlement. We would send them to the Cadastre, but they wouldn't come back to us again. And when this is built on the territory which is close to the settlement, it is a problem, but they have no other choice today. So this will be positive if we can plan where such investment projects could be constructed. Dear colleagues, we'll be finishing, and Mr. Shershun, please sum it up. 1, 2, 3. What does the law 118 address? Well, in the end, first of all, I would like to emphasize one thing. Summing up the discussion, we can say that we don't have any opponents who would be talking about that it is not necessary to transfer the lands outside settlements, but at the same time efficiency of implementation of any policy is first of all in the deep analysis of what has been implemented already. Let's recollect 2014. There were two similar draft laws. In 2015 and 2016 and 2017. You know, people say the best is the evil to the good. Well, let's think about what the taxi needs. Does it need some wheels or a painting? But 7118 addresses an important task, transfer of management of land resources to united territorial communities. It minimizes opponents and could be passed by the parliament. That's briefly. That is all. Thank you all for your active participation, and I would like to remind you that you can see this roundtable in YouTube, and please disseminate this information on your websites. Thank you.